Hello ProcJam. First of all, I hope that everybody is doing fine in these strange times. I'm Ivan, I'm a game developer, and I've been fascinated with procedural generation since I started game development. I would like to talk about a little bit about spatially infinite games, but first of all, a little bit of backstory. You have to understand that I grew up I grew up playing games during the late 90s and 2000s, and so most of the games, if not all of them, were completely handmade. There was very little procedural generation, apart from if you think about like spawning a random car, like in GTA games or something like that. So yeah, I'm kind of a generation after the kind of famous procedurally generated games like Elite, Daggerfall, and games like that, Rogue, of course. So I was completely unaware of procedural generation. My first encounter with procedural generation was actually on my first game jam. We had an idea to create this asteroid field, and I created a simple 3D model of an asteroid, and I told my friend, okay, I'm just gonna put some asteroids into our level, and he said, no, wait, and basically he wrote these two lines and created an entire field of asteroids, and I was like, wow, what? You can create... It's so easy to do this. I had no idea because I was just never exposed to these procedurally generated games before. Like I didn't know that it was so easy to do procedural generation. And so since then I was really hooked to procedural generation. So one time, a few years later, I heard about the story of Library of Babel, and the story is basically about an infinite library filled with infinite number of books, where each book has a random set of characters, which means that there is a book in that library that there's every story ever told in that library, and also perhaps a book that explains exactly how your death is going to be in detail. And this concept really fascinated me. And I wanted to make a game, and at that time, I think a week later, ProcJam happened, and I was like, okay, I want to put this idea into an actual experience that you can walk through in first person and pick up a book and read it. But I need to create the infinite library. So that was my first task, right? This was the first time I encountered with this problem of like, how do you create infinity? So in the story, the library is composed out of these hexagonal identical chambers which spread into infinity. And so when I was thinking about how to make the player walk through this library, I thought that I could make a static, basically, world of just a few chambers, and then I can wrap the player around. Once you reach the next chamber, I basically just send the player back by one chamber, and the player should not notice any difference, which works pretty good. But there was a tiny problem, and that is that from one vantage point in the library you can actually see this infinite corridor that spreads forever, right? And I really didn't want to use any tricks, because I thought like, just putting fog was kind of a lazy decision, right? I really wanted to have this sense where this kind of effect of an infinite mirror, right? So what I did is I just put like 100 chambers, 100 meshes of chambers down the hole. But the problem is that you always see this kind of skybox in the middle in a few pixels, and there's always this problem. And so I came up with an idea where I would actually take a screenshot of the corridor and kind of shrink it down and put it on the sprite in the center of the corridor, and that would completely block the end of the corridor. And you would totally think that there is infinite number of meshes, but actually there was an image of the corridor itself. And the second game I want to talk about is Norman's Sky. And as you can probably guess, the title is a joke on No Man's Sky. but it was not really intended to be a parody. The title was quite an afterthought. I just wanted to create a space game with infinite planets that you can fly to. And by the way, I made this game in 10 hours because I was late for a jam, and then, I only had 10 hours to make. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna make an infinite game with procedurally generated planets that you can fly to, a completely seamless experience. I started by splitting the space into sort of cells, into a 3D grid, or a lattice if you want, where each cell would have a single star. I sort of decided to do it that way. And each star would have a certain set of planets, right, to make it kind of more realistic. And then each planet would have a certain set of characteristics, although the only characteristics I managed to create in those 10 hours was color of the sky and color of the surface. And I thought, because you have these 3D cells, you could actually use, for example, some kind of value noise, like Perlin noise, to manipulate density of, let's say that, you have no star, or you have one star. So the way that generation of cells works is that each cell has a coordinate, and basically I use the coordinate of that cell as a seed for the random number generator. So I create a string of, basically I have a string of rules. Let's say the first one is the color of the star, or the size of the star, right? And then the number of planets, and then the color of the surface, or the atmosphere of the planet. So because I have this structure of rules, and I have a seed, I can guarantee that generation of each cell is going to be the same every time. So whenever you visit one coordinate, you are going to always see the same set of planets and the same color of the star and everything else. And that is kind of a technique that I am using in almost all my procedurally generated games to date. But that was kind of the easy part. The more difficult part was to make this infinite. So what I do is basically, kind of in a similar way in Library of Blabber, when you enter a new cell, I would just generate a new set of stars in front, and I would remove the stars in the back that are now distant from the player. So after those two games, I went on to create Trails of Tenere, which features an infinite desert, and later Infinland, which features an infinite version of Finland. But I've chosen to talk about Library of Blabber and Norman Sky because those were jam games, and they're quite simple in comparison to those two much bigger games. So to conclude, why Infinity? What makes Infinity so interesting? Infinity is kind of boring, right? If you just keep seeing the same stuff. But there is something really mysterious about Infinity, right? It's kind of like looking at the stars and thinking, is life out there? Is there something that we don't know, right? And that is really the mystery that really fascinates me about infinite games. And I think that really games are the only medium that can actually kind of present, and you can actually experience infinity. No other medium can do that. And so that's why I'm quite fascinated. Another funny thing to mention is that the top shelf in Library of Blabber is actually unreachable. And that is actually just a fluke. I did not intend for that. That's just a consequence of the kind of interaction raycast being too short. But I got a lot of messages from people saying, please fix it, it's bothering me, it's very OCD unfriendly. But I mean, why does it matter? The library is infinite. What is about this fifth shelf? It's like the 1/5 of infinity is unreachable, but 1/5 of infinity is still infinity. So that is exactly the mystery I'm talking about, and that is something that really fascinates me. So yeah, that's all from me, and hope you enjoyed my stories, and I hope that I gave you some ideas and that you're going to make some infinite games during the Proc Jam. So have a nice Proc Jam.